Writer, dramatist, broadcaster, and composer Neil Brand has dedicated his entire life to the production and presentation of music, so much so that just one episode wasn't enough to honour the vastness of his career. In part 1, we spoke of his significant contribution to the preservation of the golden age of the silent movie industry, but that was only half the story. With an impressive career in radio spanning 3 decades, Brand has penned a plethora of radio plays including The Player, Between the Lines and the award-winning Stan, surrounding the life and career of his hero, Stan Laurel. I caught up yet again with the musical polymath for more insights from a fascinating career in entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Neil Brand.
Neil, welcome back to part 2 of this special celebrating all things comedy and music. If we could return to Stan Laurel for a second, you've written a radio play about him. How did this enable you to view his journey in a different way?
That play, which I have to say I'm still very proud of, and I think may have been one of the best things I've written, actually started life for a different reason. I was reading up about Laurel and Hardy with a particular biography by Simon Luvish, which I think is called Stan and Ollie, The Roots of Comedy. And what Luvish did was give you an enormous amount of detail about their backgrounds and about their working methods together, and then filled in all the sort of the more kind of, the sadder details of the ends of their lives. And I came across a line in that book. I was wondering if it might actually be here. No, not why. I came across the line in that book, which basically suggested that after Ollie had had his stroke, because I don't know if you know, Ollie lost a ton of weight, and then he and Stan were filmed together, and nobody recognized Ollie, and there was a kind of gasp of shock around the world that Ollie looked as thin as he did. And that, I think, really depressed Ollie. And it wasn't very long after that he had a stroke, which would be the start of the kind of terminal decline of his life. After it, he's probably lived on for only a matter of weeks. And he couldn't speak. He was lying in bed and he only had the movement of one arm. So he couldn't kind of communicate per se. And Stan would go and sit with him and talk to him in dumb show, so without speaking. And Luvish makes the point that this is how they started with silent film, was that they couldn't communicate with words in silent film. So for the last weeks of Ollie's life, they reverted to being silent comics or silent communicators, which I thought was fascinating, and I thought there's a play in that. But the other thing that really fed into that play was the fact that my father died when I was the other side of the world. It was a bit of tough luck. He had gone into hospital with a heart condition, and I had been booked to go and play in New Zealand. And I said to him, I'll go if you get better. And he said, well, I'll do my best. And I got to New Zealand, and I think almost the first or second day I was there, I rang home and got my dad. And my dad had come out of hospital. And I thought, oh, this is wonderful. I'm going to get back home again, and my dad will be there. And then I think it was the day after that, or possibly 2 days after that, I got a long fax, as we had in those days, from my brother saying, your father's died. And he actually died the night that I spoke to him in the evening. I'd rung him in the morning from New Zealand, and he had, sorry, not New Zealand, Australia. I was in Australia, but I was going across to New Zealand to see friends. And I'd rung from the airport in the morning, and it was evening in London, and Dad had been there. And he died that night, very peacefully, just like gone. But it always affected me that I wasn't there. And although it probably wouldn't have made any difference, I'm not sure I could have done anything or said anything or helped in any way. I thought that the idea of having a final chance to say to my dad before he died all the things I wanted to say to him must have been in Stan's mind. knowing that Ollie was not going to live any longer. And so I invented a play in which Stan has a great deal to try and get across to Ollie, and that Ollie has obviously actually got in some way or other to respond. So I invented this play, and for the radio, uh, we cast Tom Courtenay as Stan, and the brilliant uh, Ewan Bailey as Ollie, because really all Ollie had was kind of, little movements, grunts, a little chuckle at one point. You had to recognize it was Ollie, but that was all he could manage. And Stan going to see Ollie and basically talking. And the play of the both of them in that kind of particular way, in that relationship, did in a way also reflect, I felt, their working relationship, which was that Stan was the kind of firecracker. He was the one who was always working, always directing, always new ideas. Bum, 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 bum. And often steamrolling over other people's ideas, blah, blah. So that was absolutely Stan. Ollie was a much more kind of laid back, relaxed type. He was desperate to get off the film set every day to go and play golf. That was the only thing really interested in, was playing golf. And this odd couple, at the end of Ollie's life, just kind of wrote itself. And in my head, Stan had to tell Ollie that he loved him. Now, I think that it comes out in the films. I think Ollie probably already knew that. But Stan also has to tell Ollie that he knew he was difficult, that he knew he wasn't easy to work with or live with. And so has to kind of open all this up to Ollie. And I made I didn't want it to be a misery piece, because it wasn't. My idea was that a bond that strong between two men, and particularly two men who dealt in comedy, could survive even up to and maybe even beyond the end. So I had Stan obviously kind of, trying to be as upbeat as he can, but after a while he's not able to. And Ollie has been continuously, all through the play, has been making a strange movement which Stan's not been able to understand. With the one arm he can use, Ollie's been doing that. He's been touching his neck. And every time he's done it, Stan's gone, "Oh God, are you thirsty? I'll get you some water. I'll get you some water." So he gives him a glass of water, and it keeps happening, and he keeps putting water. And at the end of the play, he's moving forward with the water, and Ollie just knocks his hand away and knocks the glass of water onto the ground, and is really desperately trying to say something to Stan, and Stan can't work out what it is, and Ollie's doing this, and Stan suddenly goes, "Oh, you're trying to do the tie twiddle. You're trying to do that Ollie always used to do with his tie. Now I get it." And Stan absolutely collapses with laughter. And he says, "And every time you did it, I poured another glass of water down your throat." So it's as if a Laurel and Hardy situation in almost the worst possible time had happened even there. And both of them get this incredible joke that that's what had been happening. All Ollie was trying to do was do that, because with his one hand, that was the one thing he could do that was still Oliver Hardy. And Stan was pouring water down. And it really was Stan not understanding what was going on, thinking he's doing the best, as always, with Laurel and Hardy. And poor Ollie being the one who ends up with his dignity compromised, as always happened with Laurel and Hardy. And that was where that play came from. And all of the kind of material in there that Stan was talking about was stuff that I'd read in the Lubitsch book that all seemed important. And then I got the invite to make the TV script. And that was fascinating, because they didn't want just two men in a bedroom. They wanted the whole story opened up. They wanted to go back down Stan and Ollie's life, to see the major moments in that. And so I rewrote the script. Initially, Tom was still on board, Tom Courtenay, And that was one of the big selling points of it, obviously, was that Tom Courtenay would be Stan. And Tom was very keen that Albert Finney should play Ollie. I don't think there's any way in a million years that BBC4, with, as far as I know, a total budget for our piece of £100,000, which this is back in about 2004, 2005. There's really not very much money at all. Um, anyway, for all sorts of reasons, Tom didn't do the piece. There was all sorts of backwards and forwards about the script and about the production. But anyway, eventually went ahead with Jim Norton playing Stan and Trevor Cooper playing Ollie. And Jim was cast at only 2 days' notice. We had gone through a massive list of names, people who would be interested, people who liked Laurel and Hardy, people who might be available. There was one particular, we were going to go with Warren Mitchell. Warren Mitchell was desperate to do it. And the producer went to see Warren at his home, and Warren was in a steel brace because he'd done his back in. And he said, "That's all right, I can do it with a brace." And he said, "No, you can't do it with a brace. I'm really sorry. We've got to see you." Yeah, so anyway, we went ahead with Jim. The brilliant John Sen directed it and was all over the script as well, very hands-on with the way that it worked and the way it was going to look. John now has been, for the last few years, the showrunner for EastEnders and Casualty, and now has gone independent. And I'm not surprised. He was an amazing collaborator to have on the TV version of Stan. And we were able to get in lots of lovely little sort of Easter eggs for any Laurel and Hardy fans. There was one moment where we showed them going through their marriages, because I don't know if you know, Stan was married 4 and possibly 5 times, certainly twice to the same woman. So Stan had an unbelievably exotic love life. And Ollie was certainly married twice. And there was a point when they were making actually their funniest film, what I think is that their funniest sound film is Way Out West, when both were going through really public and really nasty divorces. So I wanted to get in the sense of these multiple wives, but to do it in a Laurel and Hardy way. So I had Stan with a different woman coming up towards the camera and then going across. And I don't know if you've seen the film. There's one particular film where they actually pull the wipe across. So they pull the next scene onto the front of the camera. I can't remember which film it is, but your listeners, your viewers will know. So we did that time and again. And one time he jumped up and grabbed the wipe from above and pulled it down. And then at the last shot was him marrying Ollie, with Ollie in a wedding dress. So it sort of it was doing the job of telling the story, but doing it as far as possible with the two of them. And I was really proud of it. I thought it looked fantastic. It did very well. It was then released on DVD. There's still talk of it being reissued. I hope that will happen one day. But I do show a clip from it in my show, my Laurel and Hardy tour, because it's part of my take. In fact, it's all my take on Stan and Ollie, and everything I've done since then about Laurel and Hardy has come out of the process of writing that play.
So, how different is it to the one-man show that Jeffrey Holland does?
I don't know. I haven't seen it. Have you seen it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so this version, it's set in the hospital again after Oliver Hardy has his stroke, and then it's Stan Laurel just doing like one big monologue to him.
Right. I mean, I haven't seen it, as I say. I got a phone call from Barry Cryer. This is a good few years ago. And Barry said, "Have you seen this thing that Jeffrey Holland's done? It doesn't half sound like your Stan." He said, "You're going to go and see it?" I said, "Well, not, no, I don't think so." And I have to say, I don't lay any kind of claim to exclusivity on the story of Stan and Ollie. And actually, if anything, I think when someone like Jeffrey does a show like that, then the pie just gets bigger. It doesn't get smaller. More people find out about it. More people go and see it. Um, so ultimately, it's the facts are in the public domain. How you uh, then what spin you put on those facts is down to you and down to what it is you're after. I've tried to adapt Stan for the stage, not as a one-man show, but as a two-man show. And it's really hard. There was a stage version of Laurel and Hardy back in the 60s, which I think was called Stan and Ollie. And that was about as close, I think, as you can get to an on-stage version of their life, although that was sort of a kind of, I mean, the big thing about it was that you had to have two actors who really did look like Stan and Ollie and could do all the shtick. And I think that's hard. I think that's hard anyway, because, they were geniuses. And no one else can perform that sort of stuff with the insouciance, with the ability, with the timing, with the sheer chutzpah that Stan and Ollie could. John McGrath, I think it was, who wrote this play about Stan and Ollie. And I think it went to the West End and it's been done sort of since a good few times. I was after something slightly different because I wanted the framing of the whole story to be the bedroom, to be the bed, and to use a bit of stage trickery so that, Ollie's in the bed and Stan is sitting beside him talking to him and Ollie hasn't moved for a moment. And Stan carries on chatting, and suddenly Ollie walks on in the full costume. And everybody's going, "How did they do that? How did they do that? How come Ollie was in the bed and now he's there?" And it is doable. It's a quite an old stage trick. But and then everything happening between Stan and that Ollie is in Stan's imagination, is Stan's memories, Stan's imagination. But again, it's hard to it's easier to make a TV film, weirdly, of an hour in which there's a load of detail and you can be immersed in that detail than a two-man show on a reasonably bare stage where they have got to do, and you as a writer have got to do all the work of conjuring up the world. I once saw an absolutely fantastic two-man show on an empty stage called Stones in His Pockets, which was one of the cleverest and funniest things I've ever seen. And it was two Irish actors. It went to the West End. It ran in the West End for years and years and years. And it always struck me as the kind of holy grail of any theatre producer's desires, because it's just two blokes, no set, empty stage. But they create an entire world of an Irish village which has a film crew descend on it. And they play every single character. And there's a wonderful moment where they do an Irish dance and you suddenly see that all the different characters are doing the Irish dance, and it's just beautifully done. And I just remember thinking, God, if I could get Stan into something that looks and sounds and feels like Stones in His Pockets, I'd make him in. I could retire. But I've worked the script. I've worked with a production company on the script. It's been one of those things that has had to stay on the back burner for quite a long time. And I, my love of Stan and Ollie is entirely fed by the tour now, and the tour is going back out again next year. So I might possibly revisit the play, possibly not, but otherwise, I wish Jeffrey well. I hope it works for him.
Why do you think we have such a fascination with comedy stars of yesteryear?
I think because they got it right, and they got it right timelessly. Someone who could make us laugh 100 years ago, still making us laugh now, that's kind of astonishing. And that goes for everything since. It goes for the comedies of the 30s. There are some that don't hold up, certainly for me. Some that are so much of their time. I watched Bringing Up Baby and couldn't make it past the first quarter of an hour because it was just so full of mindless yammer, mostly coming from Kate Hepburn. And I put that on Facebook and I got a kicking from every Catherine Hepburn fan in the world that I had presumed to diss Bringing Up Baby, but it just didn't do it for me. But on the other hand, there are films from that time that are still absolutely brilliant. There's a wonderful one called Nothing Sacred with Carol Lombard, which is just so spot on and so funny. And one of the scenes in it that just brings home how the comedy just does not change was almost a silent movie moment. Frederick March, as a tough journalist, a reporter, New York reporter, has gone out to the sticks to check out on this story of this particular girl. I can't remember what it is she's done. I mean, it's possible. It might be something as pre-code as she's claiming to have a virgin birth. She's about to have a baby, but there's no father. And it's played by Carol Lombard. Anyway, he's wandering past these little houses way out in the backwoods somewhere, possibly in the southern states, and walking along. And we watch him from behind walk down the pavement, and a kid suddenly runs out from one of the houses, runs up behind him, bites the back of his leg, so that Frederick Marsh goes, "Ow, youch!" and the kid just runs back into the garden again. And it's just beautiful because Frederick Marsh just turning, and that's it. We have no idea why that kid ran out and bit his bum. We have no idea what, all we know is that Carol Lombard lives in a town where children are feral and will go and bite you just because you walked past their front door. Now that is absolutely timeless comedy because it's the absurdity of the situation and yet the sneaking suspicion that it could all too easily happen. And when you come through all that history of comedy, Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, not everybody's cup of tea, but they were good. They were funny. The Marx Brothers, oh my God, the Marx is that whole idea of a scattergun of comedy, which actually Vic and Bob were still doing in the 1980s and 90s. It's exactly the same thing. Mr. Bean is absolutely the comedy of embarrassment and awkwardness that was minted by Hal Roach. All the great Hal Roach comedies are about embarrassment. And one of the best of the lot is Charlie Chase. And I'm delighted to see that there is now finally a Blu-ray of, I think, something like 8 or 9 Charlie Chase films fully restored and stuff we've never seen before. And he was wonderful at it. One of his films, this is back in the silent period again. One of his films is called Mighty Like a Moose, and I'm scoring it for a little ensemble later on this year. And it starts off with the idea that Charlie Chase and his wife, they're happily married, but Charlie Chase has got incredibly big teeth, and his wife has an incredibly big nose. And on the same day, they both go to a surgeon or a dentist or whatever. He gets his teeth fixed. She gets her nose fixed. And when they come out together, they don't recognize each other. And they go down in the lift together and they're sitting on a bench. And Charlie Chase takes a little bit of a fancy to this woman he doesn't know beside him. And she's rather taken with the fact that he fancies her. So they end up going off to a party together, but trying to sneak away from their wife and their husband in the same house. And it ends up with a thing that I don't remember seeing again until Graham Chapman did it in Monty Python, which is that Charlie Chase ends up pretending to be both his original self, her husband, and the lover that she thinks she went off to this party with, just by taking his teeth out and putting them back in again. And he ends up beating himself up. He ends up in front of her coming up being one of the two, and then sort of going back in, and then coming out as the other one, getting the fist in the face, pushing a boot so that it comes up, smacks him in the chest, and that sort of thing. And he literally does fight himself, beat himself to the ground, all for her, her benefit. And as I say, that's Monty Python. The funniest of the silent movie comedies that I've seen, the Keaton stuff, certainly the Laurel and Hardy stuff. There is without a doubt all the comedy I grew up with on TV is there in embryo with the really early stuff, but it's because it works, because it still goes on working.
If you think of that who met with a good night, going
And if you think about it, that was the format for Goodnight Sweetheart.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Putting people out of their comfort zone where they had to cope. I don't know if you saw a fantastic series that's happened since I spoke to you last called Ludwig with David Mitchell.
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was fantastic. And the funniest bits were the times when he forgot that he was supposed to be pretending to be a policeman. And there's a lovely moment where they've got all of the suspects sitting in a church, all 5 or 6 of them. And his supposed number two, the detective sergeant who works under him, has been questioning them and says, right, well, that's that then. And the suspects start to get up to leave. And David Mitchell goes, no, wait a minute, they can't go. They're suspects, aren't they? It's that, aren't they? That got me because he's so far off his comfort zone. He's not sure if he actually might be wrong in what he says now because there might be some procedural thing that he's not aware of, that having been questioned, they aren't suspects anymore, but he's fairly sure they are. And the moments like that were absolutely tickled me. And that's the kind of comedy, as you say, with Goodnight Sweetheart, Mr. Bean, almost all, certainly One Foot in the Grave is about embarrassment. The Curb Your Enthusiasm, in that he sets out to create embarrassment. And there is a point, I have to say, where I can't go any further because my intolerance of incredible awkwardness is really low. There's something I can handle it up to a certain point, but there's a point where I just sit there cringing, going, "No, he's not doing that," and I can't laugh anymore because it's just too awkward, too embarrassing for someone as appallingly Britishly brought up as I was.
Yeah. And The Office.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, bingo,
Yeah.
absolutely. I thought that was what they wrote beautifully with The Outlaws. Did you ever see that? Which is the Bristol-based? Yeah. I mean, Stephen Merchant, what a great writer. But to be able to plow that furrow between something genuinely thrilling and exciting and with real jeopardy, and also having to kind of find the comic moments in the situations they're in. There's a moment where he was, because he's obviously so enormously tall, where he was standing in front of a window so that somebody couldn't see through the window because there was something really, guilty going on the other side of the window. And this woman came in and just looked at him, stared at him, and he just said, hello. And then just having a bit of a stand. I thought, that's fantastic. I'd never think to say that to someone who wanted me to get out of the way of the window. I'm just having a bit of a stand. And of course, with him, a bit of a stand is 6 foot 5 inches tall or whatever he is. So yeah, and the Office slightly crossed the line for me. There were bits in it I just found too awkward to find funny. But that never happened with the Outlaws. They just got the mix. For me, they got the mix absolutely 100% right.
You're a regular on Radio 4's The Film Program. Why do you think radio is the perfect medium to appreciate and analyze music?
Um, I don't know, is the straight answer. I got into analysing music on the radio thanks to my friend Matthew Sweet, because Matthew got me talking about film music and sitting at a keyboard on one of his shows. And I described something and then he just point at the keyboard. So I play it. And from there he kind of ushered me into the film discussion side of things on Radio 4. He did a summer cover for Francine Stock on the film program and brought me in every week to do a different score. And then they kept me on. They said, you know, come back every month and do a score. And I did it for years and years and years until the program went. And to be absolutely frank, it never occurred to me that sitting and actually breaking down a score, particularly with a piano there, would be of any interest to anyone. Because I grew up, this is probably before your time, Josh, but on BBC2 at night when the telly proper finished, they would go over to the Open University because they had Open University lectures for students at home and they could watch them. I remember that Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie did a wonderful send up of them. It was usually a very tall, hippie looking guy with round glasses and long hair, with a board beside him doing chemical equations or mathematical calculations or whatever. And it was deeply dull unless you happened to be doing that course for the Open University. And that was the sort of equivalent of what I thought I would be doing if I was sitting at a piano breaking down scores. It was only when we started hearing back from people who were going, oh God, that's amazing. And I get it now, that I realized that radio makes you concentrate and it makes you see pictures in your head. So if you're talking about music with film, the chances are people are seeing the film. They're seeing the footage that you're talking about. Now, if you take that music and then pull it to the foreground of the film, for a start, that's new. That feels different. But then if you say, oh, well, this is why this is doing this, and this is what that change is doing, and that sort of thing, the whole film takes on a whole different sort of perspective. This hadn't occurred to me in the least. And that is really what kind of made me this kind of particular USP of sitting behind a piano and talking, because actually people, they loved it. They loved, as it were, going under the bonnet of the car and seeing how the engine worked. But B, it didn't make the magic any less magic. If anything,